Hello, and welcome to our Future Farm Appalachia webinar series. Thanks for joining us. Our topic here is design and site planning on reclaimed mine lands. My name is John O'Niger, co-founder and principal designer at Regenerative Design Group, and I'm going to be facilitating this webinar and discussion with our guests, Clifford Smith, CEO of Appalachian Renewal Project, and Caleb Henshaw, Director of Reclamation and Remediation at Coalfield Development.
Hey, Hello, good to be here.
So we're collaborating on a project funded in part with a USDA Rural Business Development grant. And the project's purpose is to provide technical assistance and rural business development training for regenerative agri-tech while restoring degraded forests and mine lands in Martin County, Kentucky. The aim is to convert a former coal mine site into a flourishing farm and ecosystem through a fusion of traditional wisdom, cutting-edge techniques that exemplify sustainability, permaculture, ecological restoration. The work's also supported by the innovative folks at Regenerative Farms, Inc., who are working to solve root causes of hunger, such as land degradation, gender oppression, and poverty all over the world. So let's dive in. We're going to focus on design and planning and thinking about some of the issues and opportunities on this property. And Cliff, why don't you get us started giving us a little background on the project as a whole?
Sure, thanks, John. Yes, this project, it's located principally in Martin County. Partly the land extends into Pike County, Kentucky as well. And it's a former mine site, a legacy mine land. And our intention is to show that these lands can be used in a way that can support the surrounding communities, a sustainable reuse of legacy mine land. I personally grew up in a coal mining community. I'm familiar with it, the sort of challenges in those types of communities. And so that really became the motivation for this work, which began in 2018 when the Appalachian Renewal Project acquired this property that we're talking about today.
Great. And you want to give us a little bit of a kind of set the stage of where we're going to be talking to. This is the map of the whole property with the different zones. Since it's such a large property, can you give us a little bit of a maybe talk a little bit about the other zones as well?
Sure. So over the years that we've owned the property, we have gone through the process of making some assessments of what fits best on different parts of the site. And it is a large site, as I mentioned, about 7,000 acres. The northernmost property we call Lovely Farms, and that's what we'll be talking about today. It's where we're focusing what I call restorative agricultural interventions in terms of ecosystem restoration work. So these are things that can, on one hand, be producing an economic output for you, and on the other hand, be restoring your landscape while you're doing so. There's two zones in the middle of our property that those are more ideal for a combination of recreation and sort of pure restoration type work. So the southernmost of those two sites, I'll skip over the one that's a little bit more entertainment oriented and go to the Mount Sterling site. That's a reforestation initiative of 1,000 acres that we've been engaged in starting in 2023 and in collaboration to start with Green Forest Works. It's an area where we're hoping to show how through restoration you can generate environmental commodity credits that can then be used to make improvements to these kind of sites. And then final part of our site is located in Pike County, and this is what we call the farms at Orome. And there, over the long term, we anticipate that this area we could do very traditional using the forest farming activity within the understory of a forest. So this would be cultivating a lot of products that currently are wildcrafted today.
Great. Yeah, it's an amazing property with lots of different areas, a lot of diversity of spaces. Our focus, there's the whole property, being able to see different watersheds, different zones, and all these small sub watersheds feeding into the Tug Fork of the Big Sandy, which is flowing north and headed towards the Ohio River. And so deep in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. And so then the property that we'll focus on, thinking about some of the goals that you have with agriculture and demonstrating and establishing agriculture on a legacy mine site. This is the larger view of the whole property again, with two branches of the river coming together here, with the central focus area being this more to the north and to the west.
Right. Right. And if you zoom in on the slide showing that property, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a aerial photograph that can give people a sense of what that property really looks like from the air.
Oh, interesting. Okay, Cliff, if you, yeah, zoom in, you could even zoom in a little bit more. Interesting. Okay. So do you want to say a little bit about what the view that we're seeing here and the valley?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the area that we'll be focusing the discussion on today, and we call this the lovely farm area. In this area, we intend to develop different restorative agricultural activities and monitor those to show the impact they can have on restoring ecosystem function. There's a couple of characteristics just to point out on the site, and the one is in the foreground. That's the impoundment wall. It's a dam wall that was formed as they filled in this valley during the mining process. So this is a traditionally common feature on the mine lands in Appalachia, this impoundment wall that I'm circling.
Mhm.
And then some other features, you see these large flatlands. That's where mountaintop removal was done. And these are heavily compacted generally through a technique basically where the overburden is left and then bulldozers run over it to crush it into what is this kind of a nouveau topsoil material that then they'll hydroseed and get vegetation growing on. I think the other notable feature of these sites is just the general slopiness of the site, and the different approach or different faces that these slopes have to the sun. So this side of the property faces south and it's getting a lot of southern exposure. This is facing north and gets a lot of shade and northern exposure. So that affects the way the site performs from an ecosystem standpoint. And
Yeah.
and again, it's quite steep, and you have these pretty significant elevation changes from this top slope to this level is an elevation change of about 300 feet.
Yeah. So quite a lot of variability in the microclimates and the aspects and a lot of elevation change in the mountains. Very good. Well, that's a good segue for us to go and talk about the um, the different site analysis aspects. So let's zoom over to some of those. And go into, so a series of maps that basically focus on different aspects of the land. You have to look at the legend to see the sort of in this one, kind of a wet, dry rating. This is just roughly based on observation and some of the historic aerial imagery. The valley floor here, 9, 10, and 11, where there's some water pooling, particularly in area 11, which is just almost 32 acres. The whole valley zone being about 200 acres is the focus area. And so definitely some water coming down there and pooling from the compaction of the reclamation work post mining activity, and then draining to the west out towards that sloped hollow fill that Cliff mentioned, area number 8. And then these side hill zones tend to be much drier, maybe some pooling in some areas, would you say, Cliff?
Uh, just on little plateaus that might poke out in some of these hillsides. Because you're collecting a lot of water. The average rainfall per month is pretty consistent, around 4 inches a month. And so you get a fair amount of rainfall. And as you can imagine, these hillsides are concentrating that and flowing it down into that bottom, which you show as being much moister.
Yeah, and from the changed landform, they get also some peculiarities, like that zone 17. When we go to the vegetation, we'll see that's a area with some seepage and has got significant tree regrowth, primarily sycamore, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about these sites is through seepage, you can get water sources that promote and enable the growth of trees or species that you wouldn't otherwise have thought would be like an upland type of crop.
Yeah, you wouldn't see them on the side of a hill. So here's a little bit. I think this is actually some interesting patterning of vegetation type. Again, really generalized just from observations of primarily where is it successionally from, in the legend here. The yellow is more meadow herb vegetation with not really much woody growth. Getting into that peach orange, where what we characterize as savanna, which is 40 to 60% tree cover. So getting some tree cover, kind of sporadic regrowth. That's a sort of a next stage of succession that's happening on the property. And I think that is something we want to dig into, would present some interesting opportunities for the agricultural development, that kind of savanna regrowth. And then you get into these three of woodland, young forest, and then remnant mature forest in the light green to dark green. And so you're actually starting to get more significant in this 11, 12, and 15. You're getting some more significant tree regrowth where some even canopy and uh, canopy closure starting to form. And then a couple areas where there's some remnant mature forest, but not much. So let's keep working through. So a little bit about the slopes. This is just a classification of the gentle slopes, the lightest yellow, going up to the steepest in dark red, getting a sense of this valley, the valley bottom in 10 and 11, and then upper terrace over here to the north. And that shows up here in this slope diagram, which is more based on the darkness of the blue is showing the valley, flat valley bottom, 9, 10, 11, the steep sides to the south. So you're getting that north face slope, and then the south facing slope here on the north side of the valley, which is a much drier, hotter microclimate zone. So that's going to figure into some of the planning. Any other observations, Cliff, or any thoughts on that, Caleb, on the thinking about the slopes and how they're kind of creating these different zones in different areas?
Yeah, I think what's interesting too, when you're designing a site like this, what the mine is doing, and this is like when you say this is a valley field. To most of the people that live around here, that's what they're going to call it. They've designed this whole landscape to filter through that. That is their filtration system because there is a waterway right below it where it exits into a body of water that the community then will use. This is what they will test for contamination. This is what they're going to regulate in terms of whiskey score and all those things. But what you've seen happen is, especially in spaces like 11, where you have a lot of pooling, it's because of mostly soil erosion during this system. So the system's naturally flowing towards spot number 8. And over time, it's created these craters where that soil is compacted. So thankfully, it is using seepage. This is nature's way of filtrating. I want you to see the difference between industrial filtration and nature's filtration. So when you go to plan for all these different zones, you're going to save a lot of time and resources in partnering with nature's way of filtration. So you're looking at species that I'm not going to plant something in, zone 4 that's not, susceptible to drought, where that water, is flowing pretty quick. It is facing south. So you want to keep in mind, how is nature filtrating and fixing the problem of water flow? And that needs to be the filter of the way that you design your water systems. Does that make sense? I just think it's fascinating because you can see this, when you get to 8 and you get to that valley field, they have all the rock gable baskets. People are familiar with seeing those. They get, wired box of rocks so they can slowly start filtering the water down that stream.
Yeah.
And then nature has another plan, and it's usually better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because nature's wanting to reforest itself. And I think that's a key point too in terms of designing. You see all your succession plants that we would, say, well, these are invasive species. They're succession species. They are prepping that ground, depending on what that soil type is, depending on how that water flow is, begin to introduce that land back to the forest. And if we left it alone, it would probably be reforested in 500 to 1,000 years. You
Yeah.
may have just beautiful trees and all of that. So
Maybe
let's,
less even, I kind of wonder, Caleb.
well, I think you have, some young forests around 100 years, I would say. But
Yeah.
if you're looking at a stable ecosystem of a forest, you're looking at hundreds of years,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of things that need fixed. So as a designer and knowing what we can do with each zone, we got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, working with this system that it is really trying to do its own earth repair process after this just incredibly intense land change, landform disturbance that was really, Cliff, we're talking 10 to 15 years ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me. This was reclaimed about 15 years ago, finished. I think you have some series of photos that show some of that process. It's very, it's impressive the scale of earthwork that's occurring in these situations. to Caleb's point, you can see nature operating even in this slope slide that you have, Jono, because you can see places in the section 10 and 11 where the water has begun to create channels in its flow. I think that that's important because there are basic principles that are, that we can take advantage of that can help have a guiding hand to the restoration that nature wants to have happen, and to try to guide it in a fashion where we can accelerate that process, or make it pay dividends in the shorter term for us while we wait.
Yeah.
I think too, John, what's important, and I gave all that spiel to say what you're going to see differently in terms of a landscape like this that's been mined versus a natural landscape is the contour lines are so manipulated
Yeah.
on purpose, because they want everything to flow. And if you think of it, this is brilliant. I mean, it's an art, that the way that these guys do this, but it just doesn't. Nature won't allow that to be sustainable. So when you're thinking of, water is such a resource on a landscape, and it's especially on landscapes like this, because how expensive is it to put infrastructure on sites like this for water? You want to look at the principles of contour. Is water is always going to flow 90 degrees of contour, and that's important. We can also say it's perpendicular to contour. So I don't know if you can see my thing here.
Yeah.
So the way that they had this set up is water is flowing. This would be almost a straight line, perpendicular. You're going to look at places on your landscape to where you can put ponds. And this is how you start introducing ponds into the landscape. And I'm looking around. I'm looking even kind of right here. You have a lot of water collecting into this waterway. But this is where you have to get creative compared to a regular site, because the contour lines have been manipulated. That's a huge key in terms of developing a water system. Right here would be a good place to do water, right here. Because you see the contour lines are always are going towards that way.
It's collecting.
Right. This is not on the site,
there.
but like even right here, you see where the water's flowing in. So if you keep those principles in mind, it's always flowing 90 degrees in contour, perpendicular. That way you can make water a resource. And the beautiful part of this is most of your land is compacted. So you can actually manipulate it a lot easier than going to a piece of land that hasn't been mined. So I just wanted to put that. That was the reason why I went in my big spiel the first time. It's the manipulation of the contour lines that make this type of work very, very not challenging, but intentional.
Yeah. And I think it's also that manipulation of the contours has left, and with these mountains, has left these terraces at different levels. So this number 6 area is, a significantly higher than even 14 and 15, which is higher than the valley bottom, 9, 10, 11. So you've got these levels, which create opportunities for collecting, holding water, moving it between zones, and using that elevation to advantage.
Yeah. And I think maybe one of the things we skipped over a little bit, Jono, was just to talk about what like the baseline water design was, but you sketched it out here on the Miro board. That's what they designed the water to do, is those channels that you've highlighted. And they tried to create contours that flowed into those channels. So that's kind of the starting point. I think from a design standpoint and our project standpoint, this is very important. We have intentionally reached out and have gotten help from so many different highly skilled and very knowledgeable people as it relates to the mine lands and how they've been constructed and reclaimed, to academic folks who have an interest in understanding and studying how to accelerate the redevelopment of soils in these kind of degraded soil environments and so forth. So we have benefited from that. Green Forest Works I mentioned, but also Kentucky State University has been a good partner. Caleb at Coalfields is another entity that we have worked with from the start. And we benefit from that. But I can say a lot of this basic data is available online for your property. If you wanted to find LiDAR contour lines of your property, you can. It is available.
Yeah, and it's a powerful tool for being able to visualize these different patterns, the patterns of water movement, the pattern of the slopes, which creating the different aspects in different microclimates. Well, that's great. Well, I think we'll come back and we'll be talking a lot about these things some more as we get into some concepts and some of the siting questions that you're having, Clifford. I just want to bring up this one map here, which shows the entrance because that's a little bit a different view on it, and we'll see here the entrance to the north of the property with that where the red circle is, and some of the activity that you've already got going where the black is as well. And so then the way to get into the property then is up this road access coming all the way up and then getting into the valley from here.
That's right. Yeah, and at the very bottom, we have a nursery, and we're installing a greenhouse currently. There's area there for being able to do commerce along the roadside. There's additional area, flat area along a railroad track system to be able to do composting. And so a lot of kind of what I had envisioned our interface with the community can happen at that point. But there's also the opportunity to have community interface up on the site, and that would be more thinking about training and education activities that we're doing.
Yeah. Well, let's look at what some of your initial ideas have been here, Cliff, and with the property and some sort of visualizing this is a sort of preliminary ideas, initial possibilities for some of the activity within the valley. Do you want to talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. I think it's important probably to start with an initiative that we've been working on with the southeastern Kentucky sheep producers, and Caleb has had some input to this as well, given the work that Coalfields is doing on rotational grazing using small ruminants. I think it's probably something, to me, that the more sophisticated or multi-species we get from input I've gotten from you all and others, that maybe the more we can have positive impact on the soil development. So we may want to talk a little bit about that. But that's one initiative, is grazing. The second would be along my trajectory, and beginning with doing the reforestation work that we accomplished down at Mount Sterling, I began to think about how do we incorporate more short-term, economically productive trees in these reforestation projects so that the local community can benefit. And that sort of led me down the avenue of thinking about food forests, or that type of planting where we're getting fruit and nut production for humans that can be gathered and either used locally or sold. So that's another area of interest. Not necessarily orchards. Um, these would be more diverse forests that have multi-species in them. Again, you guys can talk a little bit about the benefit of that. And then the other idea ultimately that we came across and began thinking about is around the topic of water. And that is that we do have this elevation change that is significant. And it does create an opportunity in terms of water collection. So if you're going to collect water, to a certain degree, you want to collect it where there is water, but also where you have the highest point on your property, because that water represents energy. And you can either use it to produce energy, or you can use it energy free to irrigate and fertigate your crops that are below there. So that sort of got us thinking a little bit about aquaculture. And so when I take a big step back then from our property, having gone through all of that, I look at it and think, well, what we might have in the long term is a gigantic aquaponics facility, an outdoor aquaponics facility, one that raises fish and uses that wastewater from the fish to create fertilizer and irrigation for trees that require that. That's fruit and nut trees, and then also incorporates these rotational
Yeah.
grazing animal production parts of the system.
Yeah, great. Well, let's come back to that in a second because I'd like to dig into both the aquaculture, the food forest, and then you're also showing an area with silvopasture and rotational grazing. And then as we see in the bottom where it slopes down out of the valley, food forests and use of that water. Let's come back to that in a second. I think what I'd like to do is just kind of introduce a little bit from permaculture world. And Caleb, I know you're really familiar with zones of use and thinking about really kind of the circulation and movement into the property, because I think that citing some of these areas of use, I generally use this design strategy of thinking about zones of use, but also kind of hubs of activity that then radiate out. On a big property like this, really one of the important principle is to, I think, have some level of consolidation or concentration into activity nodes and not get too spread out too fast and be able to grow, have some successes in these zones and then grow out from there. And so I guess what I've sort of sketched out here or drawn in with these green circles is kind of from the entrance in red, where are those hubs of activity that would be like a farm hub or a visitor hub, or where people staying over, living on site, where is processing and marketing and outreach to the community happening. And so what I guess I would present to you all, and we could talk about this, is that there's these potential locations and sort of one, that you've mentioned, Cliff, that right at the entrance, it's the most accessible, most public facing, and you don't have this significant elevation gain on a dirt road to go on, where some of the activity would make sense right there. And that some of the other activities would be further into the property and nodes of activity like grazing, farm hub kind of thing, and also where visitors would come and be connecting and doing different activities on the land.
Yeah,
And
I would say too, before you get in there, Cliff, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I
No.
think I just wanted to highlight just from the designing piece how important it is to really map out everything that you'd like to do from the get-go, from step one. Like I'd like to have a classroom. I'd like to be able to have a processing facility of wool. And it may get overwhelming because, hey, I just need to take it one day at a time. Well, that's how you lose a lot of resource. That's how you don't go in with a plan. I mean,
Yeah.
the best part, and this is how you develop your zones, is from that plan.
Mhm.
And going back to that first slide, even with where you guys have mapped out, the food forest, this is the aquaculture, this is
Mhm.
silvopasture, this is food forest. Even within those zones, am I going to have a classroom here? Am I going to teach people how to graze? Am I going to have a processing facility to raise chickens? Am I going to have a place to store the produce from these forests? So keeping that in mind, I think that on a size landscape like this, you can have multiple zones. And what I mean by that is
Mhm.
per industry or per sector that you're producing on this landscape, which makes this site really, really cool, and the potential that it has. You can have 5 zones within one piece of the property, and then move over to a completely different piece and have another 5 zones, depending
Mhm.
on what sector, or if it's your nursery place, if it's your food forest place. Um, I think that's really, really cool, and just something to keep in mind in terms of designing. It is very, and you guys have done this. This is beautiful. Go from A to Z in terms of what you want to use this landscape for, and it as a designer, you have to be able to pull that out of the landowner. You have to ask them a million questions, like
Mhm.
what's a must have in terms of what this is, and then a lot of other things we will discuss further on. Um, that's so important to do it, and I'm saying this again because people don't do that.
Yeah.
When you're planning a project, you're like, oh, let's not overextend ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying you have to build everything.
Yeah.
This understanding a design's probably, a 10 to 20 year rollout, but it is important to have that infrastructure in place to know kind of where you want everything to be.
Yeah, and I
Yep.
think what you're bringing up, Caleb, is really important about having the big term vision, having it all out on the table, and even if you're not going to get to it right away, it's still there so that you know which direction you're headed. So that say you put the barn in the spot where the future pasture is supposed to be, or future uh, um, great production system. So it's really getting it mapped out, the big vision, and then often that allows you to break it into phases so you
Yeah.
can take those first steps and build it along the way, but you know where you're headed.
And then it's like, I know I want to have cows. I'm not sure where those cows need to be, or I want to have chickens. I'm not sure where those chickens need to be. Well, then maybe you need design for mobility.
Hmm.
Maybe you need to be able to
Mhm.
move. So that goes into design. So because
Yeah.
you're gonna treat the pastures in 9, 10, and 11 different from zone 5 and 14.
Hmm.
Like, you
Right.
need to know where you're putting all this stuff because it's going to involve, you don't want to waste resource, first of all,
Yeah.
but it's gonna influence your long-term vision, is going to influence your day to day.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think if
let's
you
look at that a
simplify it to
little bit.
that.
That's great. Let's look at that a little bit more. Cliff, what are you're circling some different areas and some different
Yeah,
zones?
yeah. I did a big circle, and I would call this area our zone of production.
Hmm.
This is where all of our whatever we're producing, it's happening generally in this zone.
Yep.
And then the upper piece is potentially going to be where we would have aquaculture. It's not fixed in any way, shape, or form, but like in my thinking, that's what that is. And then that second circle, as we work our way down, that's more of this fruit and nut production. And then down in the valley, 10, 9, 10, and 11, that's really where your ruminant production area is. So any kind of barns needed for that, they're going to be likely located down in there, I would think. And any kind of storage and like aggregation facility, that's for the fruit and nuts, that's going to be more likely located on sort of on your way out, but next to that zone. And I don't know what you need for the fish, any kind of fish operation. That's going to be unique. And, Caleb, you've talked a lot about animal processing in general. So I think all of that comes into play, is the complexities and uniqueness of each of the products you're raising.
Yeah. But I guess what I would like to come back to is here in gray, I've drawn in the road throughway through the valley. And so in the valley is thinking about where's that center, because if you're going to have animals are being brought in, they're brought out, they're moving around, you can add new roads, but you do have this like central artery through the property, and it's at two different levels. That green circle up top here, where the red is, that's a higher elevation than down below.
Right.
And so that has access to that zone up here, the aquaculture zone. And so I guess I would say the question is, like, let's think of it, at least for a moment here, through the lens of where's your node, your center of activity, and that I would say that some of that activity should radiate out from your center, so that so aquaculture, as an example, you want to have the ability to keep an eye on it for a while. You maybe want to fence some areas. It's going to have to be you're going to be checking the ponds. You want to keep the animals out from eating the fish. So the closer it is, at least to start with, and in an early phase, would be close to a center. So you could have this. So you could have this potential initial zone, and then it grows out from there.
Yeah. There is another road I drew in for you there, John, and that does actually get you up to the top. Or that where you're getting to from that road you showed is more of a mid-level, and it's kind of tricky to get too far into that. So,
and you can't get too far in. So that's interesting. So my question to you would be, does it make sense to go all the way up to the top and put at the beginning what's essentially a pretty high maintenance system, right? Or maybe, from the get-go, or is that something that would happen a little bit later down the
yeah, I think that's fair. And maybe what you're really doing is thinking about how to work your way up the hill in that regard. And go ahead, Caleb.
No, I would just say one of the concepts of zoning is what area you're going to be in the most. Just to simplify that, your zones that are lower are places you're going to visit the most. Zone 0 being, let's say you live there. Zone 1 is something you're going to visit every day, multiple times a day. Zone 2, you may visit it once or twice, 3 times a day. So, Zone 5 is something you may visit once a year. It may be the edge of your forest. So that's where I think John is getting at, because if you're looking at, grazing patterns down here, that's something you're probably going to have to visit multiple times a day.
Yeah.
So there's this confrontation between, aquaculture would go really, really well in this area up there, but it's a high maintenance enterprise.
Yeah.
The only time I would put a high maintenance enterprise outside of a bigger zone is if it's a specialty enterprise that you can use in your other systems. And I think that's why, Cliff, you suggested it go up there, because you can use gravity to pull from the water to hydrate the rest of the landscape with nutrient dense water. So that would be the only exception I would make as a designer to put something outside of its zone, is if you can use it in your other zones.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's absolutely right, Caleb. The reason to do that aquaculture is for the nutrient dense fertigation water. And when you look at the research too, the problem with fruit and nut tree establishment on mine sites is a combination of irrigation, but then fertilization. So it's kind of, if we're gonna, if you think that fruit and nuts and berries are an attractive set of crops to be engaged in, and I do, when I look at the financials there, it's like that's pretty interesting. If you can make that work, then you can see how those two things almost need to go together, but they don't need to go first.
Yeah, but so then we're getting into kind of a locational relationship, and so having that right location relationship. So if this is a node where that red and green circle there, then if the water's coming downhill and feeding into a fruit and nut growing zone, then it could be that is well located just down below. So you're kind of using some of those slopes just down below the aquaculture
Yeah,
where I
yeah,
marked
that
in
would be.
orange there.
Yeah, and that actually was a question I had earlier on with the slope diagram you showed,
Yep.
John. It's like at what angle or what degree of slope is just really not realistic to do farming on. And I don't know if you have ever thought about that.
Oh, yes, indeed. That's an important question to think about. I think there is a slope above which it's just so hard for if you're doing hand picking or if you need to use a ladder to get up into a tree for fruit tree pruning or harvesting, you're above a certain slope, it's just going to be too dangerous, too difficult, uh, too hard to move materials up and down. So um, I think um, I think that there are some slopes here that are going to be too steep to really functionally utilize. In particular, maybe this zone up above where we haven't totally marked it up. Um, let's see. Okay, you can see like this kind of area there, also in orange, but I think it's also having fruit trees on a hot south slope are going to be uh going to be prone to early flowering. So going to be want to particularly think about species that uh, aren't as susceptible to late spring frosts. Uh, those would typically be in more on the southern side of the valley on a north slope. So, but I think, in some ways having, this is actually a north slope. Am I still lined up here? Let's see. This is still a north slope, so it's almost like, oh no, that's not true. That's actually just going up. That's also a south facing slope, but just raising up.
No. That's you're right.
That's
That's a slope that is facing to the north, John.
facing to the north. So yeah, that's actually interesting in that within this node that could be right here, you would have some south facing slope and north facing slope. And there's this zone down below, which I think is shows some promise. There's a question there. We've talked about this cliff is having this wide open, flat, several acres that would be close to a node that could emerge right in here.
Yeah.
And it's right along the roadway. So you're sort of getting both access, proximity to a central node of activity. You're getting the potential of water collection up on this slope. If you've got the aquaculture up here starting to merge, and the ability to move that water down slope and utilize the nutrient-rich water.
Now, one of the things that we've talked about is the concept of using the site for education, and that's another public-facing activity, but it's specialized around this idea of hosting students or academics to come into the site and be observing it and engaging with it in different ways. I suppose I imagine that those kind of structures or those kind of places, those zones would be best suited at early points in the road system of the property, but at the same time, at points where they overlooked or could see a lot of what was happening on the property.
Yeah, do you have thoughts on that, Caleb? Sort of the proximity of say, a farm center to an education kind of a visitor people education event space.
Yeah, I think of that's why one of the major components on designing is your access, is wondering where your access roads are going to be on the map before you even start, the work. Another thing I would consider is your activity. You know, when we're doing educational purposes, is it going to benefit us to have flatter land that can look around and see all the structures like you're talking about, Cliff? Or is it beneficial to have it around, the food forest or the
Mhm.
aquaculture? If it was me, I would put it down kind of where I drew the house. I'd already had that
Mhm.
had that in mind because, and the
Yeah.
reason why I would put it there
Uh-huh.
is you're going to spend a lot of time in these areas anyways. This is going to be a high trafficked area. You're going to be able to see the entire landscape. Almost you could see where the aquaculture is from this area, but it's
Mhm.
also flat. It's the most flat land in terms of acreage that you have where you have
Mhm.
activity in play. So yeah, we're doing, maybe it's a classroom setting, but maybe it's a demonstration setting. Am I teaching
Mhm.
people how to build compost piles? Am I doing a workshop on butchery? You're going to want accessible land for that reason. And I'd also
Mhm.
Yeah,
say, going back to talking about the slope, it's it limits your numbers as well. That's why you need to know how many people are going to come. What's my biggest crowd going to be?
yeah,
Um, so I would think of those variables in terms of where I want to put a highly trafficked area in terms of education.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. I can
Interesting.
tell you that, like, when we have had guests visit the site and showed them the site, the route that we would take would be, obviously up the road. I'm not a good at, but then we go in this middle road and tend to stop here to look over things.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Moved
now,
over. Let's move over to the next one. It's getting a little cluttered there. So
yeah,
can,
yeah, yeah. Okay, let me.
let's
Ooh.
zoom over a little bit and
Oh,
add
there
in
you go.
things.
Vista, yeah. So the
Yeah.
Vista, and the thing about, just to talk about this, Caleb, the thing about this spot is that if you're doing work and hauling and moving, doing farm work and using this road, it seems to me like it's good that you don't have to compete with whatever else might be going on up here with people who aren't necessarily working at that time. Whereas the farm center, like you have that work area, that makes sense to me that it is down there. So I don't know. Any thoughts about that?
I would also say, like, what are my needs too?
Yeah.
And one of those is it water? Am I going to need water? How much water am I going to need? If I'm needing a large amount of water, I want to have a lot of landscape at higher elevation on my property before you get that structure, if that makes sense. Because if I'm putting it up, let's say the highest point was it 1,040 above sea level,
I think it was 1160, but yeah.
1160. I want to make sure that the vista may be in the mid tier of that
Yeah. Yeah.
versus the farm, where the farm central is. We're going to get a lot more opportunity to get water at lower elevation. So that's another component to ask when you're designing. How much water do you think you're going to need in a
Mhm.
year or in an event? That would come into play
Mhm.
there. Or you could have you know just a dual location. This vista and the farm could exist. The farm central can exist at the same time. It's just depending on you know, what are you going to need? For
Yeah.
Yeah.
for this landscape, it's water. For me, I would want to put a structure where I'm going to get the most opportunity to collect water that I can.
Yeah,
I,
yeah. I put an
I would
X in
say,
that.
yeah, and
Highest.
I think what you're highlighting there is different uses or different functional activities in that sort of a down in the valley where you're highlighting, Caleb, where there's going to be more of the grazing focus, bigger expanse of flat land. That makes a lot of sense. Um, I think you know, the Vista area where I outlined, I think that might be the place where you might have visitors come, might even be a place where there's some housing, visitor housing, or even people living in the valley could be there, and it could have some farm activity or even education demonstration kind of activity because the
Hmm.
spaces are actually pretty big around here, even around this Vista zone. It's there's some flat zones on these terraces that create some space, but even having a separation between those makes a lot of sense of your thinking about equipment, uh, animal, livestock, and not having too much
And
problem
that
with
you
that.
make a really, really good point there that I wanted to address. Like your Vista area is for visitors. It's for people that want to come and experience. They're not so much in the day-to-day
Yeah,
zoning.
Mhm,
So they're not going to be moving cows. So they're not going to visit that zone, but maybe once just to see. So I would even, if I can draw this, I would even add a little bit of an access to kind of circle that. This makes sense.
mhm.
This is to stop from
Oh yeah,
congestion, to allow a
yeah.
circle of flow.
yeah.
Um, and then just seeing where other areas that you can add in that access, like even up here. I always like to
Mhm.
try to loop when I can. Now that loop's
Mhm.
not going to be able to
Yeah.
happen there. It may be
Yeah.
smaller up here, but I have my pin set to a big dot. But you want to make
Yeah.
sure that things are flowing in terms of how many
Hmm.
people are coming on the property. But Johnny, yeah, that's a good point. And I wanted to just address like the people
Mhm.
staying at the Vista are kind of an anomaly in terms of your zones. They're 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 experiencing all the zones.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting, Caleb, because before you started to talk, I was thinking pretty much along the same lines. Like, let's
Mhm.
try to create profiles around the people who are on the site. And you have workers and people working to learn. So, kind of like the coal field development workforce training activity. But then you have these researchers or people who are working, but working more in a learning mode, more in a research and discovery mode, and that could be a student too. By the way, it doesn't have to be a full blown academic. And that those there's no reason they can't commingle, but in terms of space and what they're there to learn and do, I see the separation the way you were talking about it.
and
Mhm.
this is what I was talking about before.
Mhm.
The Vista may have its own zone map.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because like you could imagine that the Vista for school students, that zone here could be for learning how to compost or learning
Mhm.
small scale things about ruminants or things of that nature.
Right, almost the size of a demonstration farm or
Yeah,
like an experimental farm, a trialing farm where you could have different plots within there of different crops, different things happening. It's a little bit smaller scale. It's a little easier to encompass versus the valley floor seems more where you're going to have your big
yeah,
uh, grazing activity and silvopasture in what we're talking about with those savanna areas that are developing where there's fodder for the livestock, there's trees for shade, so and opportunities for larger scale rotational grazing. I also note out from this vista, so this is let's see if I have it set the the slope that goes down below that maybe gray is not the best one, but that sort of slope there, which has the potential for having kind of utilizing some of those trees and inserting other trees could be a great zone where there's fruit trees, nut trees. It's close to a people center where some care can be had. It's close. It's if the grazing center is more down in the valley, but occasionally animals are brought up and grazed through these tree crop zones where they pulse through. The trees are somewhat protected, or they're protected until they get tall enough. And so thinking about having some of those, what you're talking about earlier, Cliff, of forest garden zones, there's different patterns of these forest gardens where some could be timber tree focused with higher value trees like white oak or other oak species, maples, hickories that are grown for timber. They're going to be adaptable for grazing underneath once they get a big enough size. They can be harvested eventually for high quality timber. You can also have tree crops that are grown specifically for mast or nuts and fruit to feed livestock and graze. The livestock can pulse through grazing underneath. So there's a lot of spaces, I think, that could fit with that kind of differential um, differential forest gardening, kind of keeping it proximate to where people are. So watering, establishing trees where they need watering and protection, but also close enough from the grazing zone where they can be brought over
Mm.
and rotationally graze through those areas.
Yeah, I like that. You had earlier brought up the issue of this being a south-facing slope and kind of the challenges that way. I guess through species variety selection, you can help alleviate that sort of challenge. But what about through planting, I don't know, other intercropping other trees that help provide shade to trees that otherwise maybe would be getting overexposed from sunlight. Any thoughts that way? Is there
Yeah.
anything you can do that
Yeah.
way?
Caleb, you want to speak to some thoughts on that?
Yeah, and if it's okay, can I take a while to get to that answer? Because
Mhm.
I want to tie in almost everything that I've talked about before. This site, in terms of slope, we try to not do anything that's past 15% slope. That's just too difficult for us to do. If it's between 8 and 15% slope, which I think that this area is, Jono, you may know more than I do in terms of the data, we would want to do shorter rows because you're going to face that's fast water flow on that. So we want to make sure that our spillways are strong. The smaller the better in terms of that, but also it's in terms of reclamation. We're going to reclaim these pasture fields on the bottom much differently than the ones that you're talking about up there with the food forest. And what I mean by that, this is all going to tie in. What we're wanting to do on the pasture lands is introduce, you know, different bacteria within the soil. And we do that by multi-species grazing. We do that by introducing, local hay and letting it decompose and replant itself. We want pasture grasses. We want everything that's going to continually build topsoil from our animals, from the diverse species of those animals. It changes when we go to this spot because nature is trying to reforest herself, and she's trying to reforest herself in terms of this is a slope. Water's going to move fast, so we're going to have a drought tolerant tree. We're going to have a canopy that's like a chestnut or an oak that's going to provide that shade that you're talking about. See, I'm finally getting to the answer. But it's also going to serve a purpose. I'm also going to view what species, if it's a succession plant, as many would say, invasive. Me and Jono have this pick with that. We don't believe in invasives. What's growing there that is preparing for
Right.
the trees to reforest and it's the particular plant too kind of exposes what that soil needs. So I would plant, especially where we live, I would plant those high canopy trees there, like an oak, like Johnny was saying. I would plant pawpaws like crazy because they're drought tolerant. You could even add in a service berry, and then you start going into your layers, benefiting from the south facing sun, like a classic, you know, food forest layout. And then as I graze here, I'm not adding in diversity. I'm not adding in multi-species grazing here. I may put some place that's going to be able to graze on a slope. You'd be really surprised what a cow can do. A sheep can definitely go right here. And I'm not going to plant pasture grass here, right? Because
Right.
what's growing here is stabilizing this slope. It's wanting to stabilize it. Because
Yeah.
with the going back to what we were talking about before, the manipulation of the contour lines is susceptible to soil erosion, right? Where water is flowing very, very fast. So how is nature kind of reclaiming this part of the property in the food forest, and how can we partner with that? And I think we easily partner with it with a drought tolerant canopy. And then we go into some fruit and nut producing trees like hazelnut, pawpaw, things like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Thinking about succession, that a lot of those early succession species like the renowned autumn olive is really just improving the soil, creating the conditions that other species can come in on. And as for your comment, Cliff, or your question about support species, like autumn olive or some of the shrubby early succession tree species that could just be nurse trees, improving the soil conditions for the next trees that are going to come along. I think is really valuable in this case where a lot of the conditions are going to be really rough for some of the trees getting going. Some of those slopes are definitely steep and steeper than what you're talking about, Caleb, and over 15, over even 25% slope. And I kind of wonder if some of those areas are really in long-term reforestation, or where grazing could happen once the trees are established and the slopes are stabilized with the trees and other species. You're not having livestock on there for a prolonged period of time where they're going to create bare soil conditions and create erosion, but they're pulsing through very rapidly, grazing it, and then they're gone
With really long rest periods.
with long rest periods.
Very
Yeah.
long rest periods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the benefit of this valley, where there's just a lot of space around these kind of edge zones, where that kind of grazing could happen, both in some of these very interesting edge of the valley zones. There's a lot of space for some rotational grazing, which could be pretty fodder oriented, which is to say woody species, where the animals are using some of the woody species, in addition to the pasture mixes. Are there other areas? So we've kind of laid out an interesting pattern of of hubs and centers of activity, uh, um, activities that relate to those hubs or that are in relation to those hubs, but based on the amount of care that is needed, based on who's there doing what, because you've got such a diversity of people you're thinking about, Cliff, from the researchers, from visitors that might be learning about the agriculture, but also doing recreation. Uh, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the entrance and the processing, kind of how does that fit with the this kind of activity, the where materials or like animals, livestock are coming and going, if they're coming onto the property or leaving the property, or other
Yeah.
commercial activities like composting.
Yeah, I think, look, this is an area that is like the processing of the production that I don't have a deep familiarity with. So, I think it would be interesting to hear some insights, certainly around the logistics of transporting animals, but also in the, processing of animals. That's one thing. Processing of fruit and nuts, that's something totally different. Where are the best places to do that? You better off doing that near where you're, in the case of animals where you're grazing, or you better off taking them away and doing them in a processing facility. So that I'd be interested in all that, because I really have no great insight to that.
Do you want to speak to that, Caleb? Do you have some thoughts on different ways to think about, how are crops or animals getting to market? What makes sense on the property here versus what makes sense going to other aggregation or processing hubs?
Sure. I was going to hit on the composting question too. How are we making compost, and are we doing that while they're moving? Are we doing that in a different location? Um, and I'll say this, it goes back to, even the activity of them grazing is going to be much different than a conventional way, because we have to allow this land to rest. Well, we can capitalize on that resting period by putting them in what we would call a sacrifice paddock. So if I'm looking at the map here, and let's say I have in this area, this is going to be my long-term animal stay spot. Let me pick a different color so it's not confused with the access roads. So let's see here. Sorry. Let's do brown. Brown's a good color, right? If it will let me draw here. There we go. Let's say those are our long-term paddocks for animals, because we have to pull them off the field. We have to let the field rest almost 3 to 4 times longer than a conventional grazing system. I'm going to use these areas like this for building compost. This is kind of off where it's not going to influence your vista, your visitor section. It's close enough to where I can enter the animals back into the grazing system fairly easy, so I don't have to put them in a trailer and haul them off. This kind of flows where they're grazing this way, and then all of a sudden they turn back and go this way. We pull them off the field rests. So I'm using, a bedding like carbon, like wood chips is probably going to be the best. And then you're introducing their manure, and then you're introducing, grass clippings and all of that. We even breed bacteria to make compost. And we're allowing them to make that for us while they're staying in these paddocks. Now, it does take some upkeep in terms of they're going to need more carbon when it starts to get, a little bit soggy, or you start to smell it. It never should smell bad. If it smells bad, there's a management issue. So in terms of design, once that rest period's done and we bring them back on the pasture, we can go in and start breaking that down even more and putting that on the fields from that location. So number one, that's a closed loop system in terms of we're creating compost on farm, we're spreading it on farm. We don't have to have it hauled in from a different location. So utilizing those rest periods within your grazing system is very, very important. And you can also kind of have more control of, what you put in it. Anybody can make compost. Only a few people can make good compost.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And it's close enough too, like if you were to put it here, it's close enough too around your teaching facility to where then you could go there and do some workshops on how to make compost. So you keep all that in mind. The way that I think in terms of where I'm going to put processing facilities, that becomes a sector for me. Because let's say, with processing, you're going to get a smell from that. There's really no way around. If you've ever killed a chicken, you can remember There's going to be things that you're going to have to hide because that becomes a sector for you. So
Mhm.
what's that influence, John? It influences wind patterns. Is
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
wind usually, does it blow this way? It's going to catch that smell and take it up to the vista. So people are like, oh, this is great views, but I smell something dead. It's just not a good experience.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that processing facility in a place where it's not a deterrent away from the other map. So that
Mhm.
involves,
Mhm.
your wind patterns, something as simple as that. Or can I hide it away from, a shrub of what's that really good honeysuckle? Can I put honeysuckle in there where the wind's going to catch the honeysuckle and throw it across your landscape rather than the chickens? So I'm looking at sectors. I'm looking at
Mhm.
access. Is it going to be really, is it a closed loop system in terms of how the compost was? If I'm bringing in an input outside of farm, is it easy for them to come in and get out at a decent time? That influences that. Am I growing product
Mhm.
that I need to store long term? How does that affect what sectors am I creating because I need this?
Yeah.
I think if I simplified that, what infrastructure do I need and how does it affect in terms of sectors with my
Yeah.
whole landscape?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thinking about that relative location of getting everything in the right place so you're not having opposing or activities that are causing a problem with each other. And livestock can definitely be like that if you're how they're moving around and
Is
what their
that the
needs
wind
are.
pattern, Jono, right there?
Yeah, I threw the wind. That's the prevailing wind direction generally in the area. So
And that's going to affect, like, that compost area is pretty good.
yeah,
Hmm.
that would be bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's a second compost area that we probably would want to think about, and that's at the bottom of the hill. And that's partly because the market is there.
Hmm.
And so if we go on to prior,
Yeah, let's look here. I'm gonna bring over to your map here. If you follow where I am, I'm down at
yeah,
the
okay, yeah, yeah,
entrance road here. So
yeah,
looking at this entry areas, uh, um, where the 1714 road is, uh,
yeah.
I think we got a few minutes, so we'll take like a few minutes to talk about this and then kind of have some wrap up.
Yeah. So one of the things that people should know is that if you want wood chips in general, you can get them. You need to ask for them. People have plenty of wood chips are willing to dump on your property, and there are sites where you can put your property in and they'll come and dump wood chips. But I can tell you that they don't want to dump wood chips at the very top of a mountain. They want to
Yeah,
dump it pretty much
yeah,
right off the road.
yeah.
So I imagine in terms of making compost, wood chips are a great thing to be starting with. And we could be accepting wood chips within this area. This is where our nursery is. We always need soil for that operation. And
Hmm.
so it's a good place where we're currently receiving wood chips. The thing about the market, if you have ever been to a farmer's market, the one thing you know is that when the farmer market is ended, what you have is a lot of waste. And, depending on how active the market is, will be more or less, but you have food waste. So that's a great other addition that we'll have that's very local to making compost. And then I think the third thing that we have talked about doing is making the property available to locals to bring yard and food waste, non meat food waste to our
Hmm.
property to help with the composting operation. So those are some
Hmm.
thoughts I had, but love to get you guys thinking about that.
Yeah, I think you just have to keep in mind, like, what makes compost. Like, what's the mixture? What's the percentage? Like, I need a brown. And it's easy for us to say wood chips because we can make our own. We have the equipment. Like you're saying, Cliff, like, it's going to be hard to sweet talk these guys to drive all the way up to your site. They're going to dump it at the foot of the hill. Does it make sense to then haul it up yourself? It may not. But that doesn't, you don't have to use compost. That's just one of the things that can fit that brown. It's 2 to 3 parts brown to 1
Yeah.
part nitrogen. I think if
Yeah.
people understood that, you can still make a really, really good compost. And you can also make it functional. This is where you need to have it a good compost pile facility because it's not going to smell like death. If it smells like death, your mixture is way off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Have it near where you're going to use it.
Yeah.
Have it beside your gardens. Have it beside your nurseries because it can be it's not going to deter people if you're doing it right. If the management is right, the smell and deterrent, that sector is not there. And then, like it's a really good point, Cliff. I would make sure I had these browns in a place where I could keep them dry. That when I'm making a pile, it all goes into this design. You can even make a mobile composting area
Yeah. Yeah.
using chickens.
Yeah. Well, now I think that my thinking about this, Caleb, is like we probably have more than one area where we would do compost. We need soil up on top, and
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
reason not to make compost as close as you need the most of it. That's where the majority of our soil's needed. Any extra we made down at the nursery, we could haul up. There would be no crime in hauling up some
Yeah.
good compost. So I would,
But
Yeah.
it makes, like you said, it makes sense to make compost where you need it.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a both and for sure. You're making compost where you need it. You've got livestock that are producing manure, uh, and creating and something that you're gonna need to play with of seeing what those resource flows are in the community, where it might just be wood chips that it's really more about biomass or specialty materials that you can get a hold of to make some high quality compost. And it's worth bringing up and using to inoculate different areas, different soil zones, because you've really worked on it and gotten the biology. I don't know also, Cliff, if you're thinking the base of the hill is about accessible here where the N is the at the entrance of the property. Is it also that there's a potential market for sales of compost, or is that not really a thing in the area here?
to my knowledge, it really isn't. Caleb can talk a little bit more informed on that, but where I come from, where I came from in Appalachia, the kind of compost people bought would have been mushroom manure, and even that was a lot of times you got it, try to get it for free. So, but go ahead, Caleb, what do you think?
It's surprisingly very regulated. So
Mhm.
if you're going to
Mhm.
sell it, you're going to have to go through a lot of headache.
Yeah, yeah.
But the sources that we could use it beyond up on top are all around this area down at the bottom. So these are all fields that we
Mhm.
own, and this field in particular is like a nice little farmette that the neighbor the neighbors across the street take care of, but it has really poor soil quality, and they don't have
Yeah,
the capacity to do much about it.
I would say
yeah.
too, one of the philosophies of reclaiming mines like this is we don't let things go off the property that we need. Like if
Yeah,
we're
Mm.
selling something, it's because it's in excess. We don't need it.
Mhm.
We're going to need compost for a very long time.
Yeah, that's such
So
a
yeah,
good point. That's a super point here. That's yeah, really critical. But I do think this then becomes this node of activity where there's materials coming in special, that are going to need a lot of handling, and there's an extra effort and extra expense. But there's also some of these potential farm at fields, but there's also other businesses or markets or activities that are down here at the entrance. And another aspect of that is it's creating activity where people could be coming and going, where people coming onto the property that you don't necessarily want to come onto the property. You've got some eyes and ears on that zone at the entrance of the property.
yeah. It would be very critical for property security. Having just activity is the best deterrent from all of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, guys, this has been really great. I guess I just want to say, is there other topics to take a moment to touch on anything else we want to bring up before we sign off?
Well, the one thing we skipped over a little bit, Jonna, was fruit and nut processing. I know you got a lot of experience in that. I know from the trip we took to Appalachian Sustainable Development, I think there's some similarities that go then with the medicinal herb processing or herb hub kind of
Yeah.
aggregation and processing. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, but that would be, and where it makes sense to do that, like where you first
Yeah.
harvest, or do you bring it all down and then do what's the
Yeah.
best? Yeah.
I mean, my inclination is that down in this area that we're looking at in the entrance, because you don't need large expanses of space like we saw at ASD, Appalachian Sustainable
Yeah.
Development, and the Herb Hub for the herb processing, any kind of fruit processing, or to have it here means that it's both proximate to a road where you're going out, but it also means that if there's some other local growers who
They
want
can
to feed into the system, it's
Yeah.
really close. It's right there. I think that, within these zones, there's a lot of room, and there could be, some different kinds of setups that have
Yep.
slightly different focus within the zone like this. That would be my inclination. And each of those types of processing require their own lines of equipment with some crossover, like drying of herbs could also work for drying of fruit or drying of mushrooms. Uh,
Yeah.
and so there's some potential of shared equipment. There's potential of stimulating other growers in the area and kind of sharing in the work of running those processing lines and systems. So
Yeah.
I think that's a
That's-
whole exciting node. So you sort of see that there's this entry node of activity like what you're developing with the nursery in here, and then you've got the other crops that are coming out of the property down here, sort of on their way out to markets, and you're sort of getting a flow within the property and in and out of the property. Because it's really all about all the movement of materials is just so much energy. And the more you can kind of save on that and have some consolidation makes a lot of sense. I think that's my thoughts. And you have Caleb, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the way that we design, especially on landscapes like this, when there's a revenue generating system in place, it becomes almost like an anomaly in terms of zones. We actually create their own zoning map, but more so their access map. Like they're going to have to go on the rest of the property to get what they need and come back. This is an ideal place for something like this, if only because it's by infrastructure. In terms of some of some of the things you're wanting to do is probably going to be regulated in terms of you need potable water,
Yeah.
you need to hook up to water, you need to hook up to electricity, and this is an exit point from your farm where someone's coming in, picking up your product and leaving. This is where I would put it right here. Um, and you're not going to get potable water up there where we're at on the farm. There's going to be
Right.
some regulation that says, nah, can't do that. We need it to get to a certain degree and all that. So
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
this is the ideal spot just because it's near in proximity to existing infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree. And electricity's down there, and it just makes it a lot easier.
Right. Right. And it's
But
a
then
node.
I would still draw out a map of flow.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. Okay, what is it? What does the day to day look like? What places do they have to visit every day, and make sure there's access that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 And I think, to the little diagram work that John has been doing here, if you zoom in, you can see it a little better, but by the kind of natural layout, these three areas get broken apart from one another because the two browns are separated by the river, Tug Fork
Mhm.
River, and then
Mhm.
the brown in the nursery, the blue, are separated by a railroad track. And
Mhm.
so you can imagine being able or wanting to do different things then in each of those because everyone, people aren't getting in one another's way, basically.
Definitely, you could use that separation as an advantage, both for just clarity of where the activity is,
Yeah,
and then connection between them because they're so proximate to each other. So there's some
right.
separation, but it's actually all really within this zone here. And I think this is a pretty exciting sort of an initial public interface space where you could imagine it's a lot easier, a lot more accessible for you. You might even say, well, let's make this look really nice, make it really clear what's happening,
Yeah,
where visitors would first see the property before they kind of go further in.
absolutely. I mean, all of this development really started to come to life over the last 6 months, and I can really envision how visitors driving past this series of farm stands and kind of the energy that that puts off, and you come across our bridge and you see the nursery and everything that's happening there, um, and so you're getting a taste of what you'll see at the very top, especially once we start producing from the top some
Mhm.
significant quantities of food stuff. So it'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Super. Well, this has been fun to do some real-time exploration of these ideas. It's a big property and a big project, and so kind of chunking it out into pieces makes a lot of sense, and getting lots of people involved makes a lot of sense. Building your team and building the excitement. So.
Just hire
Yeah.
Jono.
Just-
No, I think that you're the guy, Caleb. You're right there. You gotta I think this is I'm the visiting life to come in and help out as I can. But
I,
yeah.
I would I was being funny, but I'm being serious. Like these maps are very detailed and very helpful, Jono, and I'm just encourage people that may not have this access in terms of design and how they would go about a landscape. I would say
Mm.
you need to get LiDAR mapping, number one. You can
Yeah.
generate contour lines online. They're they're not very accurate. And most of the time there's a university somewhere in your state that already has it and it's a
Yep.
resource for the community. And then there's also ways that you can, you know, map out your land by just being there. For through
Mm.
observation, you can test your soil through tricks that our grandparents taught us how to do
Yeah.
with the mason
Yeah.
jar. And so I would just say there are ways where you can map this out and it be effective, but I also just wanted to highlight how outstanding these maps are. It's some of the first times I've seen it, and it makes designing very easy. So
Yeah.
if you can, you need to hire Jono. That's my last bit.
Well, I
Very
have a shout
good.
out for sure to Jono. We've gotten a lot of help from Kentucky State. That's been really helpful. Sexpo's been a great partner, Coalfield Development. We had
Mm.
folks from Ecolocation on site to help get things started over the past year. And,
Mm.
without everyone's help, these properties, and you see them, Caleb and I see them all the time. They sit in a state of suspended animation, and it doesn't have to be that way. I think if people saw what can happen and how you can use nature as your big, lever arm to make it happen, there would be things happening. So I'm hoping we can show that.
Great. Wow. Well said, Cliff, and way to lead with a big vision. So I think on that note, we'll end it right here. And thanks a lot for being here and doing this. And we'll talk again soon.